still a little bit lookout. I try to be a little bit more cautious.
Please prepare about earthquake or like tsunami.
I do think twice before leaving the house in the evening.
One of the most asked questions about buying real estate in Japan is this: is Japan really safe? You know, Japan is known for earthquakes, typhoons, floods, and volcanic activities. In fact, Japan has more earthquakes than any other countries in the world. So about 10% of all earthquakes occur in this country. So that's a scary thought. And Japan is also notorious for having women-only cars on the train, especially during rush hours. And this is because of sexual harassment or chikan that still happens in this country today. So I recently interviewed a few residents of Japan to see how safe it is to live in this country. And before we dive into the interviews, if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button below and subscribe to this channel. It really helps the channel grow and I'd really appreciate it. And also, if you're interested in learning how to buy a cheap Akiya in Japan, I put together a step-by-step guide that's completely free, and you can download the PDF file. Link is below. All right, let's get started with the interviews. So you live in Japan. You've been here for 1 year.
Almost 1 year, yeah.
Almost 1 year.
I live in Kyoto.
So what are you doing in Kyoto?
In Kyoto, I study as an international student at a university.
And is this your first time in Tokyo?
No, my second actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Where are you from?
I'm from Germany, southwest Germany.
So today I wanted to ask foreign residents in Japan about what it's like to live in Japan, especially from the safety standpoint. You've been here for 1 year. Kyoto, Tokyo, I think it's quite similar safety-wise, but how safe is Japan?
I would say very safe compared to Europe. Very safe, especially me as a woman. I travel alone quite a lot, and it's not a problem. Of course, it depends on the people. And it depends on the place you go to, but I don't feel afraid to travel. But on the other hand, I also speak a little bit of Japanese, so I can help myself around and ask for help. Maybe for people that don't speak Japanese might be a little bit harder if they get in trouble, but usually there's always a way to get help, to find your way around, and it's really safe.
So you feel okay just walking alone like at night and traveling like in unknown areas?
I do. I mean, I'm still a little bit like lookout,
Sure.
and I try to be a little bit more cautious, but I feel like it's more safe, especially at night.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Because I've heard the opposite, side, like especially coming from other countries, like as a woman, they've been groped or like harassed in this country, and which is really sad to hear.
I've been lucky so far.
Yeah,
It didn't happen
yeah,
to me,
that's
but
good.
I do know people, I do know women that experienced that here in Japan. It was unfortunate. Yeah.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you a question about safety regarding from the natural disasters. So Japan is known for earthquakes, typhoons, and all that stuff. But have you experienced? I'm sure you've experienced minor earthquakes. But how would you?
Actually not.
You've never.
No,
experienced
it's my second time in Japan. It's like almost a year now, and I've never experienced an earthquake myself. Typhoon, also not being in a typhoon, but like the time before and after a typhoon, when the wind was still pretty strong, or like when you're at the Bay Area, the waves are pretty high, and the damages. I think I experienced that, but even that was safe.
Okay, that's good to hear. So in the past year, you haven't really experienced like major damages or scary moments from natural disasters.
No, especially like Kyoto is really safe when it comes to earthquakes. I think Tokyo there are more, I've heard. I'm not sure. But Kyoto is no. Even other people that live there longer, they said there are barely any earthquakes.
That's great. And I wanted to ask you about like how expensive or cheap is it to live in Japan? So you've been here for a year, right? So I think the exchange rate has been like the yen's been really, really weak for the past year. How do you feel living in Japan compared to where you're from?
It's way cheaper, but for me it's a little bit different because I'm an international exchange student, and so basically I pay my rent and everything from my European bank account, and I get money from Europe, like scholarships.
Yeah.
So of course for me it's a little bit easier to pay all of that. If you actually work in Japan, the salary is pretty low. Maybe it's a little bit different if you work here, earn money, and then also depends where you live. Of course Tokyo is more expensive. Kyoto also depends where you live in Kyoto, but Kyoto can be very affordable. So I think for me it's really easy to live in Japan. And food-wise, utility-wise, also very cheap.
And what are your plans after university, finishing university?
I want to come back to Japan as fast as possible. I'm leaving next year in spring, go back home, finish my studies, and then hopefully come back to Japan. I don't know how now, but I think it's definitely worth it.
And for those who are wanting to move to Japan but haven't really been able to or pull the trigger, what tips do you have for those people who are wanting to come to Japan and potentially live here?
I think people should first come to Japan as a tourist and experience Japan as a tourist, and then also engage more in the culture and hang out with Japanese people and get to know the Japanese way of living. Because I think many tourists that come to Japan, they have the same itinerary, they go to the same places and they hang out with a lot of foreigners, because Japan sometimes is not really foreigner friendly when it comes to travel. So if you experience that and you really like the way of living here, then you should decide whether or not you want to live here in the future or not. And then also, in addition to that, I think it helps if you speak a little bit Japanese, because all the paperwork will be in Japanese. And maybe if you have a friend that can help you or a translator later, then it's easier, but it's impossible to do that all by yourself.
Yeah. Do you read Japanese too?
Yeah, a little bit, but I'm still studying, so
Yeah,
all the
that's
paperwork,
impressive.
it's very hard.
Yeah. So you live in Japan. How long total? How long have you lived in Japan for?
I've lived in Japan on and off total for about 3 years, and now about a year in different places around the country.
And you're from Australia. You came from Australia to live here, right?
Yes, I've been in Australia my whole life.
And what brought you to Japan?
A few different things. I originally came over because I was doing some volunteer work in Kyushu, so I was teaching English and helping out with some of the earthquake efforts post-Kumamoto earthquakes in 2016. And now I've been here for study and also for internships. So
The past 3 years living in Japan, how would you describe your experience?
my experience overall has been great. I think that's why I keep coming back. The first time that I lived in Japan, I was lucky enough to live with foreigners and Japanese, and so I think being able to have locals there definitely helped me gain that sense of safety. But in terms of how I feel now living alone, I just love this place. The people are kind, the systems are easy to get used to, so I think that also ensures a sense of safety. And I think becoming familiar with the culture and the landscape also really helps build that as well.
And compared to the places that you've lived and where you're from, how safe is Japan? How safe is living in Japan?
So I've lived in a few different places in my life, especially within Asia and I guess in Australia as well. To be honest, I do think twice before leaving the house in the evening in other countries. Whereas in Japan, I don't feel like I need to do that at all. I've never ever not felt safe while I've been here. And I think, as a woman, that is a really reassuring feeling, knowing that if you need to grab something from the convenience store late at night or need to walk somewhere, it's not something I hesitate to do, even if it's 10, 11 p.m. Whereas in other countries, I will make sure I'm home by those times just because I don't have that same sense of security.
And I wanted to ask you a question about safety around earthquakes and typhoons and natural disasters that Japan is known for. Have you experienced something major or even medium-sized earthquakes?
I have. I was living in Okinawa for about 5 months.
Okay.
And also in Kagoshima and Nagasaki. So I definitely experienced tremors in that region. When I was in Okinawa, there was one major type of earthquake where the whole building was shaking and we had to run under our tables and just for safety. Mm-hmm. But I think the way that the Japanese system managed it was really good. So they sent alerts to our phone immediately as soon as there were any types of warnings for an earthquake. I think just being able to have that pre-warning and instruction of knowing where to go and what to do was helpful, but it occurred very rarely. And I think the times where it was happening, I was mid-sleep and I couldn't tell whether it was an earthquake or not. So.
Or you were having a dream.
I was like, oh, what was that? So it was fun.
What about typhoons? Because southern area of Japan, it rains a lot, and typhoons they hit the those areas first.
The rainy season wasn't a fun time. I won't lie about that. I think that's also just because I'm from Australia and I can't handle anything that's not sunny weather. So. Experiencing typhoon conditions was a little bit crazy, especially in Kagoshima. I remember there were a few weeks where we weren't allowed to leave the house just because of those warnings. But in saying that, I think the ways that the buildings that I was living in were like completely safe, and it was usually only for a day or two if it was those types of conditions. So I wasn't too worried. It was good.
And for those who are living outside of Japan right now but want to, move to Japan, maybe short term or even like long term, what kind of advice or tips do you have for them?
For anybody hoping to move to Japan, I would say don't be afraid to get to know the locals. Today I'm just going for a walk because it's a beautiful day. So I think that's one of Japan's beautiful secrets, is just the nature, and it's not uncommon for me to get lost and figure out where I am by doing that. And I think that's a really fun hidden way of getting to know the culture and get lost, and just don't be afraid to get to know other people.
And what are your plans? Are you planning to stay in Japan long term, or are you planning to go somewhere else?
I would love to come back to Japan one day if the opportunity arose. I'm only here for another 2 weeks, unfortunately, but one day for sure I'd love to work here and spend a bit more time in different parts that I haven't explored yet.
So you live in Japan. How long have you lived in Japan?
21 years.
Okay.
Yeah, me too. I go here.
Okay, so you were born and raised. Have you lived outside of Japan before?
No, I'm just traveling.
Traveling.
Yeah.
Okay. How safe is Japan compared to the countries that you've visited or
I think it's number 1 or number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's number 2, where is number 1? You
Kind
think?
of Denmark or Swedish.
Okay.
Is safe. I'm from Brazil, so Japan is a very safe place comparing to Brazil. It depends on the city in Japan. Like my hometown in Japan is Nagano. They're like a countryside in Japan, so they are very like safety. But like 3 years ago, I moved to Tokyo to live alone. I think there are like guys, like a men. When you go Shinjuku or Shibuya, there are guys that they ask you like, let's go out or eat something. Like you're so beautiful, but they are very nice. Flirting is like pushing when they come to us, like, where are you from? I don't like that question.
You think like a countryside is safer than Tokyo?
Good for like having fun or like going party or like traveling. It's good place, but not living is not good. Like if you want to live in Tokyo, Japan, like countryside like Chiba or Nagano or like Okinawa or Hokkaido is best.
And what about like living outside of Tokyo? Like the cost of living, is it significantly cheaper than Tokyo? What do you think?
Like cheaper, yeah.
How about Nagano?
Nagano, cheaper, but Tokyo, a little bit expensive.
And let me ask you a question about other types of safety. So Japan is known for a land country of earthquakes and a lot of typhoons, right? And you've probably experienced some maybe major ones or minor ones. How would you describe your experience living through those? Especially Chiba, right? That's really coastal.
Yeah, really hard time. I'm living almost in the Nagano, so there are mountains around Nagano, so we don't have like many earthquakes.
Were you here or in Chiba when 2011 big earthquake happened?
Chiba.
You were in Chiba.
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
I'm so scared because I'm really worried about my mom. I just worry about my parents.
And what do you think about those foreign nationals who don't live in Japan wanting to move to Japan? Do you have any tips, advice for them in succeeding with living in Japan? Maybe working too.
Please prepare about earthquake and like tsunami. Don't live in close to like sea.
Yeah.
A little bit like below. I think if you are young, you have to have an experience living in Tokyo. And after you have time and go travel around Japan, and you're gonna find some place better than Tokyo.
One last question. What's your favorite thing about
Japanese food. Washuku is so healthy. The safety. For the safety in Japan, if you want to keep your family, it's a good place.
Good place to work.
Good and nice.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this kind of interviews, and if you did, be sure to leave a comment below and let me know what you thought. Before we end, I have a quick announcement. We're hosting a free live training session on how to buy your first property in Japan in just 90 days. And it's going to happen on January 4th, Japan time. So be sure to save your seat by registering below. The link is over here. Thanks again for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and watch this video next for more. See you in the next one.